There are two narratives that are helpful in understanding this act. The first narrative is how this act came about. The second narrative is what the act actually says. So let me walk through both. The first narrative is effectively this. I went to Vanderbilt undergrad, Vanderbilt Law School, was a Judge Advocate General in the United States military, deployed to Iraq with an infantry unit, came back from that, worked in the music industry, was lucky, got ahead financially, decided to become a Christian overseas missionary, went on a bunch of mission trips overseas, which ultimately led me to the fight against human trafficking. And I joined groups that were fighting human trafficking, groups like the FBI and former special ops that were training up to do overseas extraction. And in joining those groups, I had access to an incredible amount of data. And in looking at the data, it was quite obvious that the human trafficking problem that exists is not something that's just overseas in Cambodia and Thailand and Malaysia, but it's something that's in our own backyard. It's a worldwide problem. And it's also clear to see that the internet has proliferated the human trafficking holocaust that we have. I mean, easily accessible pornography and easily accessible prostitution hubs have created a nightmare for the public health, a nightmare for criminal justice and law enforcement. So I basically, looking at the evidence, came to terms with the fact that we needed to do something to push obscenity, child pornography, revenge pornography, and prostitution hubs all back underground. Now, we can't get rid of them, but we can make them harder to access. And so basically, I decided to file a lawsuit against Apple to start with, and it made international news. And it was widely ridiculed. Bill O'Reilly made fun of it, Jay Leno made fun of it, and overseas in the UK, they did make a big spectacle of the lawsuit. But the International Business Times was absolutely correct by saying that 7 days later, British Prime Minister Cameron was giving me exactly what I asked for. He was quoting my litigation left and right, saying things like I was. We asked that the tech companies sua sponte comply with this request. We're not here to legislate morality, and this is not a prohibition crusade of pornography. This just is a burden-shifting matter that will protect children and families from exposure to content that can, quite frankly, ruin their lives or lead to criminal liability. So Apple showed up in the litigation to fight tooth or nail. They don't want to be regulated at all. They don't care about children. They don't care about the consumer. They care about profits, bottom line. And so in fighting them, they at one point basically told the judge, well, the reason they don't comply with state and federal obscenity laws is because none of the other tech companies do either. And so I filed a federal lawsuit against Google, Microsoft, Dell, Verizon, HP, Samsung, and so forth and so on. Basically, they were hauled into court for racketeering and obscenity, racketeering and sex trafficking, racketeering and fraud, racketeering and products liability violation. The litigation caused them to make their best arguments for why they should not be regulated. Their arguments are horrible. I mean, they're almost laughable. The bottom line is that they were not able to get around the Supreme Court holdings in Ginsburg and Ashcroft. And so that was the biggest problem they faced. Being victorious in litigation did not matter, but what did matter was to force them to make their arguments for why they shouldn't be regulated. And so the litigation basically really gave birth to this act. And I was called to D.C. to meet with Senator Rubio, Senator Corker, Senator Mackey, types like that. I mean, Democrats and Republicans. And it was really when I was with Senator Lee and Senator Hatch's Judiciary Committee members that we came to terms with the fact that we really needed to write 50 bills for all 50 states that would codify basically what we had come up with through the litigation. And by filing it on the state level, it would make it easier for the federal government to also regulate it. The bills are different on the federal level than the state level. The state level really focuses on the retail stores, where the federal bill mainly regulates manufacturers by telling them they can't ship products across state lines without preset filters. But this bill is really best off as a state law because it pulls from the existing state statutes. It pulls from the display statute, the prohibition against promoting obscenity and promoting prostitution, and the prohibition against distributing pornography to minors. And so all of those things coming together, we have written the bill for all 50 states. We have over 27 states now signed on. We expect there to be about 40 states that will roll this bill out. And we're talking to all of them at this time. It's important to note that this is not something that just came about overnight. This is coming about after 3 years of multi-state litigation and the tech companies making their best argument arguments for why they should not be regulated. And the thing is that these matters aren't shallow. They're not whimsical. They're not reductionistic. This bill cures the failures of the Communications Decency Act. It cures the failures of the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, and really will set society up to enjoy more human flourishing. This produces more freedom. Not all forms of speech are equal. Obscene speech is harmful speech. It's been clearly established. There's secondary harmful effects of that speech. The Supreme Court has found that over and over. Although in the litigation, we had 33,000 testimonials from Fight the New Drug, and we had countless groups providing us with sworn statements to talk about how it's destroyed their lives or injured them. We also had 9 mental health experts show up to testify about how it's hurting the public health, but we didn't need to do any of that. And that's because we had the Supreme Court holdings in a manner in which they found pornography, prostitution hubs, produces all kinds of secondary harmful effects. But it's not good enough to just say that pornography is a public health crisis. We have to do something about it. We have to regulate these matters, and we have to do it in a manner that accords with the First Amendment. And this bill does that.